My name is Paul Cloutier. I'm from Method, which is an experience design firm here in San Francisco, New York, and London. And we've worked on a lot of different products. We've worked on things like Basis and Microsoft Band and some medical devices. And it's given us some interesting perspective. And this is Mark. Mark's at Google.
Yeah, Mark Spates at Google, working on a few products. So thought that we could start to talk a little bit about why and how you build these connected products. I think we've seen a lot about the machine learning and data's awesome, but there's a fundamental question of like, why should you build something? I think Paul and I would love to discuss that and also get your feedback and questions as we go through the process.
Yeah, I think we'd love to get questions along the way too, to make this as interactive as possible. I think we can talk at you guys all day, but it'd be great to get your thoughts as we go.
Yeah, so I've been building just kind of products for a very long time, and what I've started to realize is that the process is, as beautiful it may be, creating products for product's sake sometimes just doesn't make sense. And I think the Internet of Things has that problem right now. And there's like these fundamental questions that I start to ask our team when we're building things. And the first is like, what's the human emotion that you actually want to tap into when your product is being interacted with? And then the second piece is like, based on that emotion, what value do you want a human to give to that product, right? And then that starts to lead into really tactical things. So that's the vision stuff. That's what Paul works on, right? He's really good at like pulling that out of a team because most teams can't step back and do that themselves. But then these next three questions are really tactical. And it's about making a business, because at the end of the day, you should be building a product that hopefully provides extreme consumer value, but more importantly, allows you to create a very good business that employs very smart people and helps our economy continue to churn. So these are like fundamental things that I think about. So the next three questions, and these are the ones that you need to answer at your C-level all the way down to your product team, which is, what are we trying to replace, right? Is there a product out there that we're trying to replace? And then the next question, if we replace that product, what's the PAR experience that we have to deliver? And what's that one extended thing that we can do that makes people think like, wow, this is a lot better than that thing that it just replaced? And then the last piece is, what are the ecosystems and how do you use the data to change the user's perception of that device? And these things are really critical because you're seeing more and more devices starting to combine and come into one black box equals 3 products. So if you can't answer those last 3 questions, I would fundamentally look at you and say, well, why are you building it? There's really no reason to build it. And I'll kind of pause there to see if there's any questions or thoughts on that, because that's kind of a lot. It's very philosophy driven, but that's the way at least I push my team to build products. Awesome. No one? Oh, sweet. What's up, man?
So I reckon the question is, because I have some connected stuff in my home. The question is I've heard people comment here before, one of the panelists before was talking about didn't understand the smartwatch and things like that. What I see is a lot of people that don't try some of this stuff don't know the value associated with it. So the question is how do you educate people to understand, to want something they don't know they need, right? So for instance, there's a lot of data that, like for instance, when I put a Nest type device in my house, all of a sudden that data gave me a lot of power to make good decisions. And the issue I see with the Internet of Things is, in the home and the connected kit is people don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how valuable that data is until they actually get it. And that was my case. I revolted putting stuff in my house. Now I've got it in there. I'm like, wow, I can make some good decisions about this. So how do we educate people?
Well, I think I'll ask you a question back to you. Like, why did you think you needed that device?
Well, I needed it because my thermostat quit working. I had to buy a new one, so I went in and get it.
So there was a decision point in which you were replacing something, right? So the fundamental thing is you have to hit these consumer values. Either it's a passion point or it's a need. I think passion are things like cooking, health, parenting. Like, you can touch on these passion points. I mean, marriage is another one. Like, there's these big events where like people spend a whole bunch of money yearly just because it's a passion point. So that's one way to educate. Take a vertical and put something in there that is best in class, and believe me, that passion point will figure it out. there's this replacement model where I think it's really interesting to me because I grew up in the Midwest, so probably can't tell, right? But like, yes, right? Missouri barbecue is the best. If anybody wants to know. But the point being is that if I can't figure out how to go home and talk to my college roommate and my high school friends about a product, I know it's not ready for prime time. And what I always find works with the middle America, because that's who we're selling to. Like the coast help a little bit, but like the coast will not make you a business. I promise you that, right? If you want a real business, you got to figure out how to get to the rest of the world, and specifically, you need to convince the middle of America. And to do that, what I found is like, ask yourself this: if I was to replace a light switch, how would I replace a light switch? And what does a light switch actually represent? And so Paul and I talked about this a little bit, and a light switch is one of the most interesting devices in the world because we actually accept its limitations because of its simplicity. And for me, if I said I'm going to replace a light switch, I think the light switch, the human emotion that I would have to tap into and why someone in the middle of America would get it, it's knowledge and safety. If I walk into a dark room, I do not know what's in that room or if it's safe or not. A light switch helps me with that. It makes me feel safe once I understand what's in there. So really, it's not that I'm replacing a light switch. I need to figure out, if you walk in a dark room, how do you feel safe? And there's a lot of ways to do that. And then from there, I start to think about how I explain that value to the consumer. So your value is you're replacing something. Someone else's value is like, hey, I really love cooking, and I want the best V machine in the world. Like, that is how you explain the value. You can't have this hammer looking for a nail, which I think a lot of these products are.
Yeah, I think very tactically, we'll use a bunch of different tools, but two common ones. To that point, being able to answer why, being able to really understand what value do you have. And so like working back to that value proposition to say, is a light switch actually there to turn on the lights, or is it to provide a greater sense of security and awareness in what's going on? And then suddenly when you realize, actually, what is our purpose here? What are we doing? What's our means to an end? Is the starting point of that. And then much more specifically is a tool called the customer journey. And it's just looking at that broad perspective of steps and phases that a person goes through while they're trying to achieve that goal. So that a classic version of that is awareness to consideration to purchase to usage to recycling, renewal. And as you start to understand a thermostat or a light switch or whatever that is, with that sort of spectrum in mind, you start to understand that, well, within awareness, what can we do to create an understanding of this? During consideration, once I've decided that I want it, how can we sort of generate knowledge in terms of comparison against other things? And it just brings a certain amount of rigor to considering the why. Why are you even doing this? Mm-hmm. And what relevance do you have, as opposed to a single point in time, which is maybe a very device-centric perspective when you just say, okay, it's a thermostat, let's build a thermostat, when in fact it's something much more than that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really important to think about as you guys are building products is, I think we've gotten this moment where we all want to make the hit movie, and I think that's great, right? If you can make a hit movie, that's awesome, right? And so I just think it's hard. I'd rather be making like, what's the name of that movie? What's the horror movies, the bad ones, like Scream? What is it called? Scary Movie. I want to make Scary Movie 30, right? It still makes some money, right? It's always relevant because Halloween's always relevant. Like, I just want to keep pumping them out until I figure out, like, I have an audience and they love what I'm doing. Like, it's really hard to make like Jurassic Park. So the point is, like, figure out how to get your stuff in people's homes so you can figure out how they're going to work with it. Paul and I talked about this. At this point, developing products in a connected world, we're all trying to figure it out. No one is going to have a really good answer. I promise you that. So the only way you're going to develop your own perception of it is get into someone's house, look at how they're using it, look at the data, and then figure out what's really important. Because I promise you, it's not going to be the hypothesis that you thought out there. You're going to be like, oh, people are really going to do this, and you're going to find out, like, actually what they're doing is they're hacking it to do this weird thing over here. We should not build that product. We should just build an app, and that app is really good money, and it has really good value, or vice versa. So it's getting in people's hand, and I think that's the best way we've learned about how to build something.
Yeah, connected home is interesting. We were talking about that earlier. It was just that is actually one of the hardest markets because it's so vast. There's so many things going on at home. Actually, home is like, I don't know, it's like 12 or 15 or an infinite number of specific use cases. That, whether it's cooking, whether it's comfort, whether it's relationship management, whether it's healthcare. There's all these things that actually happen in the home. So when we talk about connected home, I think we obfuscate the behaviors that are actually going on there. So when you get in the home, you realize there are people using their TV for healthcare purposes. They're exercising in front of the TV. They're watching TV while doing the laundry or whatever. There's all these weird mixed up behaviors that you just don't understand until you put yourself in that place. So
yeah, people are different people at home.
Yeah.
Like the people at work are not the people. They're not that same person at home. And so I think that's why getting into people's hands is really important, because if you don't, you're going to assume something wrong. So like right now, we're working on something, and our team was like, hey, we can do this really cool thing where we can learn, and we kind of stopped ourselves. And the reason why is like, let's do something very deterministic, because that gives me really clear ones and zeros if this is a plausible situation that we should be solving a problem in. So I think that's another way that you didn't hear a lot about that up here, because a lot of people are like, hey, let's jump to machine learning. Well, machine learning needs training models. Training models means there's very deterministic things that you want to try to accomplish. Figure out those deterministic things before you get to the actual training model itself.
Yeah, especially for a new product where you're establishing a new value proposition, you're trying to communicate to that point. What is the point of bringing this thing into my home? When suddenly it's completely dynamic and making guesses and learning about you. Sometimes that can be very challenging from an understanding of what this is going to do. It introduces risk, it introduces concern and fear. And so sometimes there's more deterministic approaches where you're like, look, it does one thing. When you come in the house, it turns the lights on, done. Like, that you can always revert that. It's not going to broadcast that to Facebook or whatever your concern would be.
Yeah. Well, I'll pause, see if there's any more questions. That was a great question, by the way. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen.
Chicago.
I think in our business and in our company, we have clients come to us from a range of stages in their product development. Some like, hey, we have this great idea, but now what? And then we have companies that come to us thinking they know everything, and they just want to paint a pretty picture on top of it.
Mhm.
Is a good time to bring in the design team, the experience design team, and what do you think is a dream team to launch a successful product?
So I think we were saying this, and I'm stealing from Paul here, so I'm going to give credit to the author. He said something to me that I thought was really interesting. And first of all, the baseline question is everyone needs to be in the room today. I don't think this is going to be like true in the future, but today we're all doing stuff specifically in the connected realm that everyone has a valid question, right? Like, hey, is there a privacy concern here? Is there a UX concern here? Is there a governmental concern here? Like, we're all playing in this space. So at this point, we're all figuring out together. Today, everyone should be in the room as early as possible. Let's assume that that's a true statement. When should that team, I guess I would rephrase the question, it's not when do you bring them, the question is when does that team start executing? Because like, let's assume you all get there. I think what a lot of people have a hard time doing is getting to a point where everyone can agree and you can start executing. I think that's probably really hard for your business. Like, you get a client, they're like, I'm the client. Like, most clients are the worst. Like, there's very few that you get and you're like, oh, I love that. I want to work with you guys all the time. Most of them, like, you're kind of like, they suck. But let's assume that like everyone's on the same page. I think the real question to ask is, we have this dream team. When do we start to execute, and why do we start to execute? And I would say start executing as soon as possible. Don't get too caught up into PRDs. Don't get too caught up into like designs and mocks. The world is not perfect. Like, get out there, test your hypothesis, prove yourself wrong, and if you can prove yourself wrong, then move on to the next thing. And if it's right, build on it. I think too much slideware is created right now in a very fast-moving industry, and that scares me a little bit because people are selling dreams that actually aren't feasible to build.
Yeah, feasibility is a big part. I think as a design firm, like oftentimes design firms aren't super concerned with the follow through, and I think what's starting to happen is that we're beginning to to get really excited as a design firm about bringing real things to life. And so that's changing our skill set, where like a design firm in the past was deliverable based and you kind of worked through slideware to justify an hourly rate. Increasingly, you're seeing design firms engaging at an earlier level. They're beginning to look at sort of points against the development of a thing. There's all kinds of stuff happening right now. And so the commitment to bringing it to life is more and more a part of the design firm's toolbox. And what that means is it changes a lot of those deliverables, changes a lot of that process. It forces you to kind of think a little more quickly and try things along the way. But I think the example we were talking about before was this, we're doing some work with a couple medical device companies, and in one of those particular cases, there was a 6-month-long odd cycle to get something developed to a fidelity that you could show it off. Then it would go through a layer of lawyers, and then it would go through another layer of lawyers, and then it would go to the FDA, and then it would come back through those lawyers all the way back down to us, and then we could do something about it. And that was roughly a 6-month cycle. And so learning how to bring the lawyers into the design process, having a regular sort of cadence of basically a legal stand-up where we could regularly get those guys involved, and then even bringing our process more in line with what the FDA was looking for so that we could tune that process to bring those things to life. So bringing that from 6 months iteration cycle down to 6 weeks, which is still a long time, but for medical tech, that's pretty incredible that we were able to go through a rev of seeing if this could actually live. And that's really important, figuring out how to engage with reality early in the process.
Yes, sir.
So my question is enterprise Internet of Things. Talk about maybe a couple of verticals where you've seen some innovation coming in the next several years, whether it be in manufacturing or transportation, where really you're seeing connected devices, allowing things to be more efficient, and innovation taking place, where we're going to see that more in the enterprise side of things.
Well, I'll give you kind of 2 points. First, it's already there. Like, N2M was a thing, and it's still a thing. And so one of the unique companies that use that stuff, like you look at how FedEx just works in general. Like, they use data logistically, Yellow Roadway. Like, so that stuff is there. And I think it's going to continue to be there, right? Because their business is about being efficient and about making sure that they maximize their time on the road. I think the other point there is, how does this really change a job in an industrial environment? I think that's a really interesting question, because when you start looking at what GE is doing with their kind of like industrial Internet of Things, right, predicting that there's a certain part that is potentially broken because it was made in a certain factory and that certain factory has been contaminated. Let's make sure that that batch does not get into any of the engines, because if it gets in the engines, like all those engines are ruined. And so they now have like tracked down to like screws and potential widgets that have went bad, and making sure that they don't make their way into like the actual tooling or the actual engine itself. That to me is really unique, because what it does is it creates this other layer of jobs, right? And this other layer of job is like, when did whoever was running the engine factory thought they were going to need a BI person? Like, that didn't exist. And I think that's where you're going to see it really get affected, is how do these companies actually use the data? Because getting the data is not hard. And you got companies like Sigfox who are throwing up 2G networks so that you can track anything that you want to track, right? The question is, what do you do with the data? And that's like my fundamental kind of knock on what's happening a lot in this space, is that everyone's like, data is awesome, that's awesome, it's awesome. But if you go to most of those people and I ask them what you're going to do with the data, they're like, I don't know, but I have it. And so that's the next logical step that needs to happen. Collecting data is not hard. It's having the right people in place to actually use the data so that it becomes a part of your feature set or a part of why you're different or better, not just something that's sitting like some random storage place somewhere.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing is some traditional industries, and they're oftentimes like they're industries that largely dealt with knowledge about a large group of people, and we've seen a strangely large number of insurance companies coming out of the woodwork asking for help. And I think that's a good example of a company that is dealing with this transition from people to person. They know a lot about people and general behavior of people, and now suddenly sensor tech, just big data, any number of things are available to tell you about a person. and it's wreaking havoc. Well, it's about to start wreaking havoc on their business model. And I think that's where the interesting opportunities are, not just the like, cool, we can make a wearable for you so you can track that, but a deep understanding of what that's actually going to mean to their business, to the way that claims work, to the way that they can sort of tune that along the way. So there's a lot of industries like that that are very interesting. And I think that just keeping an eye out for the impact, not just from a person standpoint or from a design standpoint, but also from a business model standpoint.
I have a question about ecosystems and interoperability among companies, among brands. So I just took the chance and went over to Target here, where there's this open house and where you can experience all these different products which you actually can buy today. And in a way, it's fascinating. In a way, it's also a little bit illusionating because you have all these different products and they work well with their sensor and their cloud and their app. But I think it still requires some more standardization, that they would also really work across, and you also could combine data from different vendors, which probably also requires an understanding of where is the business, so where do I compete and where do I collaborate. So how do you see this evolving, that we really see ecosystems emerging to the benefit of the consumer, that will be able to choose from different brands and getting the best service from different providers?
Yeah, so I'll put it like, take off my Google hat, and I'll put on my Internet of Things Consortium hat. So I think this question is a question that happened at the beginning of the internet, right? There's like 1,000 protocols and a way to send packets across the internet. It worked itself out, right? Now we have this awesome thing, it's beautiful, people make us like beautiful computers, like it's gonna work itself out. And the reason it's gonna work itself out, one is because right now we're still in a phase of defining amazing use cases and amazing experiences that drive people to go buy these things. Once those are starting to formulate and someone starts to build stuff that people start to buy a lot of, they will be the default protocol. Whatever they do, we will follow, right? So I think we're just early, that's all. The second thing I would say on that is interoperability is like this technologist utopia. Consumers don't care, right? Like I got a Samsung TV with a terrible remote, and I got an app that can control that TV if I really want to, and then I have like a Chromecast. I have like all these random things, but like if you really want to make it work, if you want to tinker with it, you can make it work. But there's still a lot of Samsung TVs sold. My point being, it's not like the TV industry got together and was like, this is how we're going to make TVs, and this is how we're going to make speakers. It's about making sure you deliver great devices that solve a real problem. And then from there, interoperability will figure itself out based on the use cases. So I think we're just early and the use cases aren't there, and I don't think we have to solve interoperability today.
Yeah, I think that's where some of the more machine learning oriented aspects of this can come into play is the job of making all those things work together. Is that a human oriented process where everybody has to cooperate and actually come up with a protocol? Or do we, as designers and creators of these devices, figure out ways to sort of understand the environment and adapt based on what's going on? I think we're in a phase where everything has a screen and everyone has a particular input mechanism, but rather than interoperability of standards and protocols of language, obviously data has to move around, but gestures will become more and more naturalized. Is it voice? And suddenly voice is a standard interface for a lot of different things. Or maybe it's not voice, maybe it's simply presence. And when we begin we'll standardize on those actions and those behaviors, and I think lots of things will start to connect simply because they have to, because the human is the ultimate kind of standardization. It's the way we do things.
So I really like the philosophy and tactics and the approach to product. I'm wondering if there's room to think outside of the box in that conceptual model, to maybe go down a road that you might say, why are you building it? But that could ultimately lead to something that's worth building. So is that just a separate process where you're like rapid prototyping and experimenting with ideas where you don't have good answers to all those questions?
Oh yeah, I never have a good answer. Yeah. That's why we do it. You always start in like, hey, in the best case scenario, this is going to add this value, and so yeah, that's all the questions, and it's groupthink on this a little bit, so it's okay that it's groupthink. If we all look at the question and we go, yeah, we think that's an interesting question to answer, then you get it out there. And you don't know where it's going to go. You have no idea. It may be a feature. It may be something that you come back into 6 months. So the important part is if there's enough people who agree to test it, you just have to test it. Even if you don't know if it's going to have value or not, you should just test it. The key part is realize when there's value there or when there's some false positives that are leading you to think it's real when it's really not real. But like that's a whole nother session probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a normal design process. It's just simply being able to test something and remove risk at a relatively early stage. Just try something, get it out there, whether it even, and you do that with hardware even, like create a quick mock-up, make something out of foam core, get it in people's hands and watch them use it, or pretend to be them and go through the motions. And that's just super important to be able to put yourself in the mindset of using it.